Welcome back to Legal Lessons. I'm Tari, and today's video is all about liability. By this time, we all heard about Travis Scott's recent Astroworld Festival, which took place in Houston, Texas on Friday, November 5th. Fans are really excited to get back into the live music events, but unfortunately, this festival ended in tragedy when ultimately 10 people passed away from the events at the festival. So far, close to 100 lawsuits have been filed, naming Travis Scott, Roc Nation, and Drake and others as defendants in the lawsuit. For the most part, most of the lawsuits allege that the defendants failed to provide a safe environment, adequate security, and adequate medical personnel in case of emergencies. Now, as with all things, there are people who disagree on this. Some people believe that Travis Scott was on stage and so he can't be held responsible for what happened out in the crowd. Some people even chimed in saying that they believe that if Scott would have gotten off the stage or tried to stop the show, this itself would have caused more chaos and more destruction in the crowd. So, for the people who believe that Travis Scott is not responsible because he was on the crowd, and the people that believe that he has to be responsible because it was his festival, today's legal lesson is for you. Today's legal lesson is about liability. If you are found to have acted negligently, you could be held liable in a court of law. Now, negligence is a cause of action under a type of law called tort law. Now, whether Travis Scott will be held liable for the events that occurred at Astroworld and the 10 lives that were lost comes down to a question of whether he knew or should have known of an unreasonable risk of harm to his concert goers and attendees. Now, when the court or jury is analyzing a negligence claim, there are 4 elements that the court considers. Those 4 elements are: 1, whether the defendant had a duty of care to the person that is suing; 2, whether the defendant breached that duty of care to the person; 3, whether the defendant's action or breach was the but-for cause of the person's injury; and the 4th element is whether the defendant's actions or inactions was the proximate cause of the plaintiff's injuries. In very plain words, it means, is there a sufficient link between the defendant's actions or failure of action that caused the plaintiff's injury? If a jury finds that all 4 of these elements have been proven, then the defendant will be held liable for being negligent. Now, 2 of those 4 elements that I mentioned to establish a cause of action for negligence are pretty straightforward and should be easy to establish. Now, the duty and the but-for causation elements are pretty straightforward and easy to establish because the duty element is already spelled out in the law, and it says that store owners owe a duty to paying customers to protect them from unreasonable risk of harm. AKA, Travis Scott owes a duty to the concert goers to protect them from unreasonable risk of harm. So the duty element is one that we don't foresee them having, a lot of trouble establishing. Now, the but-for causation is also one of those elements that is pretty straightforward because but for the concert goer being at the festival, they likely would not have been crushed by the crowd, right? So that's something that they are going to be able to easily establish and meet those 2 first elements. Now, the other 2 elements, breach and proximate cause, are a little more challenging to establish, and this is where the hurdle will come in for the plaintiffs. So as it relates to breach, in order to establish breach, the jury is going to essentially compare the actions of the defendant to the actions of a reasonable person in the same or similar circumstances. And so comparing those 2 people's actions, again, this hypothetical reasonable person in Travis Scott's circumstances to what Travis Scott actually did, is going to come up with whether or not he breached his duty, right? So that's how they establish that element. Now, in my personal opinion, the biggest challenge and the biggest hurdle to establish will be the element of proximate causation. Proximate causation is essentially a question of whether or not Travis Scott had reason to believe that there was an unreasonable risk of harm for his, concert goers. Basically, was that risk of harm foreseeable? Now, whether or not this type of tragedy was foreseeable is something that Travis Scott is going to have a difficult time defending against. Travis Scott has a history of having very energetic and chaotic shows. As a matter of fact, he was arrested twice before, in 2015 and 2017, for inciting a riot at his shows. So whether or not he thought that this type of incident was foreseeable is a little harder to deny when you've been charged with something similar before, right? And I'm sure many of you have seen, there's even recent viral video of Travis Scott at one of his previous festivals or concerts encouraging his crowd to attack another fan at the crowd because he thought he stole his shoe. So again, whether or not these type of incidents or accidents at his festivals and concerts is something that he should have foreseen as a risk is something that he's going to probably have a hard time defending against, and is going to be one of the elements that is key to whether or not he's liable and will be held liable for the negligence that occurred there at that festival. Considering all that we know now about the cause of action of negligence and liability, tell me, what do you think? Do you think that Travis Scott is liable? Do you think that this type of thing was foreseeable considering his history and the type of events that he has? I personally have my own opinion, which is that he'll likely settle outside of court, but I want to hear your opinion. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're updated with our next video. Obviously, this is a developing story, and so we will be right here to share an update with you as soon as there is more to know. Until next time, stay safe and out of trouble.